The echoes of the serpent's throat had faded, replaced by the quiet rustle of leaves and the steady rhythm of their onward march. Yet, within the hearts of Akan's warriors, a different kind of sound had begun to stir, a subtle, insidious murmur that whispered of uncertainty. The initial euphoria of their successful deflection of the settlers, the raw adrenaline of the skirmish, had now settled into a more somber reflection. The land, their steadfast ally, had proven its power, but the cost of that demonstration, the effort it had demanded, was beginning to register. Akan felt it most keenly. He saw it in the fleeting glances between warriors, in the slight hesitations before a question was voiced, in the way their conversations, once animated with shared experience, now often drifted into an unnerving quietude. The mission, imbued with the gravity of safeguarding their ancestral lands, was a heavy burden. It was not merely a matter of physical defense, it was a spiritual undertaking, a sacred trust passed down through generations. And as the reality of the settlers' unyielding advance pressed in, a question began to form, unspoken but palpable. Were they truly strong enough? During the long watches of the night, huddled around the low, carefully shielded fires, conversations would often turn inward. Young Kalen, his youthful exuberance tempered by the harsh lessons of the past few days, found himself replaying moments of the engagement. He remembered the sheer desperation in the eyes of a settler, his face streaked with dirt and sweat, as he stumbled over an almost invisible root. It was a small detail, easily overlooked, but it had unnerved the man, breaking his focus. Kalen had felt a surge of triumph then, a confirmation of their intimate knowledge of the terrain. But now, in the stillness of the night, he wondered if such small victories were truly enough. Were they merely delaying the inevitable, like a trapped animal thrashing against its restraints? "We pushed them back," he had said to Lyra one evening, his voice barely above a whisper, as they kept vigil on a high ridge overlooking the new quiet valley where the settlers had been forced to regroup. But they did not break. They are like the persistent rain, Akan. Even when the clouds scatter, they gather again. Lyra, her gaze fixed on the distant flickering lights of the settler encampment, a beacon of their relentless presence, nodded slowly. Her own spirit, usually as unyielding as the mountain stone, felt a subtle erosion. She had seen firsthand the settlers' ability to adapt, their willingness to sacrifice their own comfort and safety for the advancement of their cause. They were not the ill-equipped, disorganized rabble they had sometimes been in the past. These settlers, though clumsy in the wilderness, possessed a grim determination that was unnerving. Their numbers are their shield, and their sheer will is their sword," Lyra replied, her voice laced with a weariness that belied her strong frame. "We fight with the spirit of the land, but they fight with the fire of ambition. And ambition, when unchecked, burns fiercely." The subtle shift in their demeanor was not a betrayal of their duty, but a natural consequence of the immense pressure they were under. They had been trained for conflict, prepared for the physical rigmarole of battle. But the psychological toll of a protracted struggle, of facing an enemy that seemed to multiply with every setback, was a different kind of test. Doubts began to fester like unseen wounds. Was their strategy of attrition sustainable? Could they truly outlast an enemy that seemed to draw strength from its very losses? Akan found himself wrestling with these same questions. He observed the subtle signs of strain, the slight tremor in a warrior's hand as they prepared their arrows, the moments of distraction when their minds seemed to wander to the safety of their families, the hushed conversations that ceased abruptly when he approached. He understood their fears. He shared them in a way. The responsibility for the lives of his people, for the future of their heritage, weighed heavily on his shoulders. One evening, as he sat alone, tracing the familiar patterns of the constellations in the ink-black sky, the weight of his doubts became almost unbearable. He had rallied his warriors, instilled in them the courage and the conviction to defend their homeland. But what if their courage was not enough? What if the strength of their connection to the land, while profound, could not overcome the sheer, unyielding force of the settlers' advance? He recalled the ancient stories, Tales of their ancestors who had faced overwhelming odds and emerged victorious. But those were legends, whispers from a distant past. This was the present, a tangible threat that was growing with each passing day. He remembered a conversation with his grandmother, a woman whose wisdom was as deep and enduring as the oldest trees in their sacred groves. She had told him, "The greatest battles are not always fought with arrows and spears. The most dangerous enemies are the ones that reside within, the doubts that gnaw at the spirit, the fear that paralyzes the will. If you can conquer those, you can face any foe." One evening, as he sat alone, tracing the familiar patterns of the constellations in the ink-black sky, the weight of his doubts became almost unbearable. He had rallied his warriors, instilled in them the courage and the conviction to defend their homeland. But what if their courage was not enough? What if the strength of their connection to the land, while profound, could not overcome the sheer, unyielding force of the settlers' advance? He recalled the ancient stories, tales of their ancestors who had faced overwhelming odds and emerged victorious. But those were legends, whispers from a distant past. This was the present, a tangible threat that was growing with each passing day. He remembered a conversation with his grandmother, a woman whose wisdom was as deep and enduring as the oldest trees in their sacred groves. She had told him, "The greatest battles are not always fought with arrows and spears. The most dangerous enemies are the ones that reside within, the doubts that gnaw at the spirit, the fear that paralyzes the will. If you can conquer those, you can face any foe." He looked around, meeting the eyes of each warrior, seeking to rekindle their belief, to remind them of the sacredness of their cause. "The settlers are many, and their numbers may seem overwhelming," he continued, acknowledging the very heart of their unspoken fear. "But their strength is not in their sheer multitude. Their strength lies in their belief that they are destined to succeed, that their cause is righteous. We, however, have a strength that they can never comprehend, the strength of belonging. This land is not merely a territory to us, it is our mother, our provider, our very essence. And a mother will always fight fiercely for her children." He spoke of the ancient strategies, not to dwell on the past, but to draw parallels to their current situation. He reminded them of the times when their people had faced overwhelming odds and had prevailed through cunning, resilience, and an unshakable faith in their traditions and their connection to the natural world. He emphasized that their current mission was not about outright annihilation, but about preservation, about making the cost of invasion so high that the settlers would ultimately be forced to turn back. "Every day they remain here, we learn more," Aiken stated, his gaze sweeping across the assembled warriors. "We learn their patterns, their weaknesses, their fears. We are the wind that shifts the sand, the water that erodes the stone. We do not need to meet them head-on in open battle. We need to be the thorn in their side, the shadow that watches their every move, the unseen force that makes their progress slow and perilous." He then outlined specific tasks, assigning small groups to further scout the settlers' movements, to identify their supply lines, and to analyze the effectiveness of their defensive formations. He encouraged them to share any observations, no matter how small, believing that even the most insignificant detail could become a crucial piece of intelligence. He stressed the importance of maintaining their own discipline, their own unity, and their unwavering focus on their sacred purpose. "Doubt is a tool of the enemy, a poison that weakens the mind and the spirit," Akan concluded, his voice resonating with a renewed conviction. "We must guard against it, not by ignoring it, but by confronting it with the truth of who we are and what we stand for. We are the guardians of this land. We are the voice of our ancestors, and we will not falter." As the warriors dispersed to carry out their duties, a subtle shift had occurred. The whispers of doubt had not entirely vanished, but they had been momentarily silenced, pushed back by the renewed clarity of purpose that Akan had so carefully fostered. The weight of their mission remained, but it was now shared, understood, and met with a rekindled sense of resolve. The internal battles were far from over, but for now the spirit of resistance had found its voice once more, strong and clear, echoing in the vast silence of their ancestral lands. They had faced the creeping shadows of their own uncertainty, and in facing them had found a deeper reservoir of strength, a testament to the enduring power of unity and unwavering belief. The path ahead was still fraught with peril, but they would walk it together, their spirits bound by a common purpose, their resolve hardened by the trials they had already endured. The air hung thick and heavy, a cloying blanket woven from the moisture of the stagnant swamp. Days had bled into an indistinguishable blur of hushed movements and strained vigilance. The relentless patrol, a dark stain on the horizon of their existence, had forced Akan and his warriors into this sodden, unwelcoming territory. The vastness of the wetlands, usually a place of hidden sustenance and quiet refuge, now felt like a cage, its murky depths reflecting not the sky above, but the suffocating weight of their predicament. The usual symphony of the wild was muted here, replaced by the unnerving, repetitive chorus of unseen amphibians and the whisper of reeds that seemed to mock their stillness. Each croak, each rustle was amplified in the oppressive silence, a percussive beat that underscored their growing unease. Akan found himself staring into the opaque waters, his reflection distorted by the ripples of unseen currents. The stoicism he wore like a second skin felt brittle, threatening to crack under the sheer, unyielding pressure of their situation. He had always believed in the inherent strength of their people, in their deep connection to the land, a bond forged over countless generations. But here, in the suffocating embrace of the swamp, that belief was being tested in ways he had never anticipated. The settlers, a force as persistent as the slow encroachment of the mire, had proven remarkably adept at tracking, their determination a chilling counterpoint to the natural fluidity of the wilderness. "They are like the mist," muttered Kalen, his young voice raspy from disuse and the damp air. He sat hunched beside Akan, his normally bright eyes clouded with a weariness that seemed too profound for his years. Always there, never truly gone. We hide, and they find us. We move, and they are already ahead. Lyra, ever watchful, scanned the perimeter, her hand resting on the hilt of her knife. Her usual fiery spirit seemed banked, reduced to a smoldering ember. "Their persistence is born of desperation," she said, her voice low and strained. "They fear the wilderness, and yet they push into it with a ferocity that belies that fear. It is a strange thing to witness." Akan nodded, though he said nothing. He felt it too, the gnawing unease that had begun to settle deep within his bones. The great spirit who had guided their ancestors through countless trials, who had imbued the very earth beneath their feet with life and power, seemed distant. Had their actions, their defiance, somehow angered the ancient forces? Had the great spirit turned its face away, leaving them to the mercy of these encroaching strangers? The thought, once an unthinkable heresy, now slithered into his mind with a chilling familiarity. He looked at his warriors, huddled in small groups, their faces etched with fatigue and a growing apprehension. They had faced death unflinchingly in the open skirmishes, their courage a testament to their training and their love for their homeland. But this protracted state of hiding, of being hunted, was a different kind of warfare, a war waged not on the body, but on the spirit. The constant tension, the gnawing hunger, the gnawing fear of discovery, these were the true weapons of the enemy, subtle yet devastating. The silence of the swamp, so alien to the vibrant chatter of their forest home, was beginning to play tricks on their minds. Every snapped twig, every distant bird call, was magnified into a potential threat. Whispers of doubt, once dismissed as fleeting anxieties, were now taking root, nurtured by the oppressive stillness and the relentless pressure. Some warriors began to speak of omens, of ill-favored signs in the flight of birds or the patterns of the clouds. Others, their faith visibly shaken, murmured about the futility of their resistance. "What if they are meant to be here?" One of the younger warriors, Rion, whispered to his companion, his voice barely audible above the incessant drone of insects. "What if the Great Spirit has willed this to be, and we are merely fighting against the tide?" His companion, a seasoned hunter named Torvin, merely grunted, his eyes fixed on the murky water. But even Torvin, known for his unwavering resolve, seemed to carry a heavier burden of unspoken fears. The ease with which the settlers had anticipated their movements, the uncanny accuracy of their patrols, suggested a knowledge that went beyond mere tracking. It felt as if the land itself was being subtly betrayed, its secrets laid bare to the invaders. Akan watched them, his heart aching. He knew that despair was a more insidious enemy than any armed settler. It was a slow poison that could erode the foundations of their resistance from within. He had to find a way to rekindle their hope, to remind them of their strength, of the sacred covenant they held with the land. But how could he offer solace when his own spirit was being assailed by the same doubts? He remembered his grandmother's words, spoken on the eve of his first hunt. "The deepest shadows are cast by the brightest lights, my child. And in the darkest nights, the stars shine their brightest. Do not mistake the absence of sunlight for the absence of the Great Spirit. Sometimes it is in the stillness that we are called to listen most closely." Listen. That was it. They were so focused on the noise of the enemy, on the clamor of their own fears, that they had forgotten to listen to the subtle language of the land, to the wisdom that resonated in the silence. The swamp, though daunting, was not empty. It teemed with life, with resilience, with a profound understanding of survival. He rose slowly, his movements deliberate, drawing the attention of those nearby. He walked towards the edge of the water, the soft mud yielding beneath his feet. He knelt, cupping his hands, and drew up a mouthful of the dark, cool water. It tasted of earth and decay, but also of life, of the ancient cycles of renewal. He spat it out, not in disgust, but in a gesture of respect, a silent acknowledgement of the swamp's power. "The Great Spirit has not abandoned us," Akan announced, his voice carrying a quiet authority that cut through the murmuring. He spoke not with the booming resonance of a war cry, but with the steady, unwavering tone of one who had found a deep inner calm. "The Great Spirit tests us. Yes. It calls us to find strength, not in the absence of hardship, but in the heart of it." He gestured to the seemingly desolate landscape around them. "Look around you," he urged. "Do you see only emptiness? Or do you see the unseen forces that sustain life even in this place? The roots that anchor the reeds, drawing sustenance from the muck. The insects that feed the birds, who in turn spread the seeds of new growth. This swamp, like our people, is resilient. It endures. It adapts." He turned to face his warriors, his gaze sweeping over them, seeking to reconnect with their spirits. "The settlers believe their numbers and their weapons are their strength," he continued. "They believe the land is something to be conquered, to be tamed. They do not understand that true strength lies not in domination but in belonging. We belong to this land, and it belongs to us. This connection, this deep, abiding love, is a power they can never comprehend." He picked up a smooth grey stone from the water's edge, turning it over in his palm. "This stone," he said, holding it aloft, "has been shaped by the water, by the currents, by the passage of time. It did not resist the forces that acted upon it. It yielded, and in yielding, it found its form. We too must yield to the circumstances, not in defeat, but in wisdom. We must flow like the water, finding new paths, adapting to the obstacles, until the relentless pressure of the settlers wears them down, just as the water wears down the stone." He picked up a smooth grey stone from the water's edge, turning it over in his palm. "This stone," he said, holding it aloft, "has been shaped by the water, by the currents, by the passage of time. It did not resist the forces that acted upon it. It yielded, and in yielding, it found its form. We too must yield to the circumstances, not in defeat, but in wisdom. We must flow like the water, finding new paths, adapting to the obstacles, until the relentless pressure of the settlers wears them down, just as the water wears down the stone." He explained that their current stillness was not a sign of weakness, but a strategic pause, a time for observation and for the land to reveal its secrets. They would not meet the settlers in a confrontation that played to the enemy's strengths. Instead, they would become the very essence of the swamp, unseen, persistent, and ultimately unforgiving. They would use its hidden waterways for swift, silent movements, its dense vegetation for concealment, and its very nature to confound and frustrate their pursuers. "We will be the whispers in the reeds," Akan declared, his voice gaining a quiet intensity. "The unseen currents that pull them off course. We will be the biting insects that drain their energy, the deceptive ground that swallows their steps. We will make their presence here a constant, unnerving struggle, a battle fought not with the clang of steel, but with the slow erosion of their will." He spoke of the small victories, the moments of advantage they had already gained, not to boast, but to remind them of their inherent capability. He recounted instances where their intimate knowledge of the terrain had thwarted the settlers' plans, where their swiftness and agility had allowed them to evade capture. These were not mere accidents, they were manifestations of their deep bond with the land, a bond that the settlers, with all their numbers and their machines, could never replicate. "Let the fear of the swamp be their downfall," Akan stated, his gaze hardening with renewed purpose. "Let the unknown depths and the unseen dangers gnaw at their resolve. We, however, will draw strength from this place. We will become its extensions, its silent guardians." He outlined a new set of tactics born from their current predicament. Small, mobile units would be dispatched to harass the settler patrols from the periphery, using hit-and-run tactics that drew the enemy deeper into the treacherous terrain. Their knowledge of the edible plants and the safe water sources would become their lifeline, while the settlers would be left to contend with the very real dangers of foraging in unfamiliar, hostile territory. The emphasis would shift from direct combat to a war of attrition, a slow bleeding of the enemy's spirit and resources. "We are not warriors of the open plain," Akan concluded, his voice ringing with a quiet certainty. "We are the children of the forest, the masters of the hidden path. And in this swamp, we will prove that the greatest strength lies not in the force of the blow, but in the persistence of the touch. We will not despair, for despair is the surrender of the spirit. We will endure. For endurance is the true measure of our connection to this sacred earth." As he finished speaking, a subtle shift occurred. The heavy silence remained, but it was no longer filled with the suffocating weight of unspoken fear. Instead, it seemed to hum with a nascent energy, a quiet resolve that had been rekindled by Akan's words. The warriors looked at each other, not with doubt, but with a flicker of understanding, a shared recognition of the path ahead. The temptation of despair had been confronted, not banished entirely, but pushed back, replaced by a quiet determination, a renewed faith in their ability to weather this storm, not by fighting it head-on, but by becoming one with the very forces that sought to contain them. The swamp, once a symbol of their entrapment, was slowly beginning to transform in their minds, becoming a crucible of their resilience, a testament to the enduring power of their spirit. The oppressive dampness of the swamp had begun to seep into the very bones of Akani's warriors. Days of constant vigilance, punctuated by the gnawing discomfort of their soggy surroundings, had worn them thin. The enemy's relentless pursuit, a shadow that stretched across the humid air, had forced them into this suffocating embrace of reeds and murky water, a territory that offered little in the way of comfort, only concealment. Akan had seen the flicker of doubt in their eyes, the subtle slump of shoulders that spoke of more than just physical exhaustion. Despair, a silent predator, was beginning to stalk their camp, feeding on their fatigue and the unsettling quietude of this alien landscape. They were hunters, accustomed to the vibrant symphony of the forest, but here, their senses were assaulted by the monotonous drone of insects and the unnerving rustle of unseen creatures in the water. The land, which should have been a source of strength and sustenance, now felt like a prison, its suffocating stillness mirroring the growing stillness in their spirits. It was in this atmosphere of creeping despondency that Nokomis emerged, a figure of quiet strength amidst the encroaching gloom. Her presence was as familiar and comforting as the scent of wood smoke after a long winter, a reminder of the enduring traditions that anchored their people. While the warriors wrestled with the external pressures of the settlers' pursuit, Nokomis understood that the battle for their survival was also being waged within their own hearts and minds. The physical toll of their ordeal was undeniable. The constant dampness fostered aches and chills, the scarce and unfamiliar food left them weakened, but it was the erosion of their spirit that posed the most immediate threat. She moved with a practiced grace, her weathered hands accustomed to the delicate work of harvesting and preparing the bounty of the earth. She had spent her life learning the secrets whispered by the wind through the leaves, the healing properties held within the roots and berries of their ancestral lands. Now, in the heart of this unfamiliar swamp, she searched with an even greater urgency, her keen eyes scanning the dense undergrowth for the specific plants that could offer solace. She sought out the broad leaves of the Wingashk sweetgrass, known for its calming aroma and its ability to purify the spirit, and the resilient stalks of Miskojisag, red-tinged leaves, whose roots were famed for their efficacy in easing fevers and the deep-seated chills that the swamp so readily inflicted. With a small collection of these precious herbs, she returned to the makeshift camp, her presence a silent balm to the weary souls gathered there. She found a relatively dry patch of ground, sheltered by the drooping branches of a willow tree, and began her work. With a small, smooth stone, she gently crushed the leaves of the Miskojisag, releasing their faint, earthy scent. She then added them to a small, chipped pot, along with some of the sweeter-tasting Miskawaba, red maple saplings, for a touch of natural sweetness, and to temper any bitterness. Over a carefully tended, low-burning fire, she steeped the mixture, allowing the water to draw out the healing properties of the plants. The steam that rose was not merely water vapor, it carried with it the essence of resilience, a fragrant promise of relief. As the tea brewed, Nokomis turned her attention to the physical ailments that afflicted the warriors. She gathered soft, fibrous moss and mixed it with the crushed leaves of mashkadesh, ground cedar, creating a potent poultice. This she carefully applied to the swollen ankles of Kalan, whose youthful energy had been no match for the treacherous terrain, and to the aching shoulders of Torvin, who had carried the heaviest burdens with stoic silence. Her touch was gentle, her movements imbued with a quiet confidence that spoke of generations of healing knowledge passed down through her lineage. Each application of the poultice was accompanied by a soft murmur, ancient words of power and comfort that resonated with the very earth beneath them. When the tea was ready, Nokomis poured it into hollowed-out gourds, offering it first to Akon, then to the other warriors. The warmth spread through their bodies, easing the tightness in their chests and soothing the raw irritation in their throats. It was more than just a drink, it was a ritual, a reaffirmation of their connection to the land and to the wisdom of their ancestors. As they sipped the fragrant liquid, the heavy weight of their despair seemed to lift, replaced by a fragile but persistent ember of hope. "The swamp tests us," Nokomis said, her voice soft but carrying the weight of profound understanding. She sat cross-legged, her gaze steady as she met the eyes of those around her. "It seeks to break our spirit, to make us forget who we are. But the Great Spirit provides, even in the most unlikely places. These plants grow not in defiance of the swamp, but in harmony with it. They draw strength from the very conditions that threaten to overwhelm us."